People like you don't belong here. Officer Brad Tillman sneered, then in front of a room full of silent onlookers, poured hot coffee onto the coat of a quiet black woman seated in the lodge cafe. Angela Robinson didn't flinch. She looked up, her voice calm, almost haunting. You have no idea who I raised.
Oh
What
my
would you have
goodness.
done if you were there, watched in silence, or spoken up? Tell me
Hey.
what you feel
Oh
watching
my
this moment.
goodness.
Share your thoughts in the comments because stories like this deserve to be seen,
Hey.
felt, and remembered. Under the snowy silhouette of Mount Rainier, the grand lobby of the Timbercrest Lodge glowed in the amber light of an early winter morning. It was a scene from a travel magazine: crackling fireplace, glistening pine garlands, and the hum of conversation over clinking coffee cups. Tourists lounged in leather chairs, their laughter bouncing off the wooden beams as ski gear and designer coats lay strewn over plush benches. The smell of cinnamon, roasted beans, and pine mixed in the air like nostalgia. Angela Robinson stepped inside, quietly brushing the cold from her wool coat. Her presence was soft, almost ghost-like, yet dignified. In her early 60s, with streaks of silver woven into her tight curls and deep, thoughtful eyes, she moved with a grace that didn't ask for attention. She stood for a moment, taking in the warmth, then approached the cafe counter. "Excuse me, may I sit here while I wait for my room?" She asked the barista, her voice calm, barely above a whisper. The young woman behind the counter gave a hesitant smile. "Of course, ma'am. You can sit anywhere you'd like." Angela nodded politely and moved toward an armchair in the corner, placing her book and a small leather satchel beside her. She pulled out her journal and began writing occasionally, glancing at the large windows overlooking the snowy trails. Minutes later, the warmth was broken by the voice of a man, sharp-clipped, authoritative. "Ma'am, this area is reserved for guests." Angela looked up, startled. A tall, broad-shouldered white man in civilian clothes stood over her. A badge hung loosely from his belt, and a travel mug steamed in his hand. I am a guest," she said, still seated, her tone steady. The man scoffed. "Do you have a key card on you?" Angela furrowed her brow calmly, reaching into her purse. "I just checked in. My room isn't ready yet." "That's not what I asked. You can't just loiter in a place like this, especially not dressed like you wandered in from the street." The cafe fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. One couple looked away. A man behind a newspaper lowered it slowly, watching. Angela inhaled deeply. "Sir, I'm here to rest. I'm not bothering anyone." He leaned closer. "You're not exactly blending in." And then, without warning, he tilted his cup and let a stream of hot coffee spill down the sleeve of her coat. Gasps echoed. A spoon clattered onto a saucer. Angela jolted more from shock than pain. The liquid stained the soft beige wool dark and spreading like ink on paper. A woman seated nearby rose slightly, then froze. The man stepped back, taking a slow sip from what was left of his drink. "You've got 30 seconds to get up and leave, or I'll make a call." Angela stood silent. She didn't wipe her arm. She didn't shout. Her lips tightened for a moment, then relaxed again. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He laughed. "I don't give names to trespassers." "I see," she replied, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, just something deeper. "Older," a voice called out from the counter. "Officer Tillman, is everything okay?" It was the manager, nervous mid-30s, scanning the room with darting eyes. She's not a guest. She's refusing to leave, Brad Tillman said, casually turning toward him. I didn't say that. Angela corrected, her voice still even. I said I am a guest. I have a confirmation email if you'd like to see it. The manager hesitated, then looked at Tillman. She just doesn't look like our usual clientele. A teenage boy, sitting in the far corner, headphones in his ears, slowly turned his phone downward. He had been recording for several minutes, hidden behind his hoodie and a copy of National Geographic. His hands trembled slightly as he stopped the video. Angela picked up her bag, her wet sleeve hanging limp at her side. I will wait outside. She turned and began walking toward the exit. No one moved. No one offered a tissue or an apology. She passed the barista, who lowered her eyes. She passed the manager, who exhaled in relief. She pushed open the door and stepped back into the snow. Behind her, Officer Tillman chuckled and tossed his now empty mug into the trash. People like her never learn. But someone had learned something. The boy with the hoodie slipped out quietly, phone in hand, following the woman through the snow-covered path. The air was still. The moment was not over. It was just beginning. The cold wind whipped across the lodge parking lot as Angela stood outside, the coffee still cooling and drying on her coat. A light snow began to fall again, clinging to the fibers of her sleeve like ash. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just stood erect and unbothered in appearance, but 1,000 thoughts churned beneath her composed exterior. Inside, the world kept spinning. Cappuccinos were still being served, and laughter returned like nothing had happened. Brad Tillman had gone back to his seat, stretching his legs out, scrolling through his phone with smug satisfaction. The manager, Greg, retreated behind the counter, giving quick, forced nods to approaching guests, as if to reassure them all was under control. The other patrons, they went quiet. No one moved. No one mentioned her name. She became a memory the second she stepped out the door. Angela slowly walked the perimeter of the lodge, not because she was lost, but because she needed to breathe. With each step, her boots left soft indentations in the snow. She passed families taking selfies, lodge staff decorating a pine tree, and a delivery driver unloading pastries. The world didn't pause for what happened. But in her heart, something pulsed. Old memories, sharp and familiar. This wasn't her first encounter with that tone, that assumption, that entitlement dressed up as authority. She'd felt it in high school when a teacher once accused her of cheating because her test scores were too high. She'd felt it as a young mother in the grocery aisle when a woman clutched her purse tighter at her approach. And now, at 62, it had found her again in a place she paid to be dressed in cashmere, with her room booked 6 weeks in advance. Back inside, murmurs spread like wildfire among the employees. Sophia, the Latina waitress, wiped down an already clean table, biting her lip. She had watched the whole thing. She'd wanted to say something, anything but fear held her throat shut. She'd seen what happened when people questioned officers, especially ones like Brad. But the look in Angela's eyes when she left, soft, disappointed human, haunted her. It wasn't rage. It was resignation. And that was worse. Across the room, Mrs. Whitmore leaned over to her husband and whispered, "She was just trying to start trouble. They always play the victim." Her husband nodded absently, flipping through a newspaper without really reading. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she set down another mug. In the staff lounge, Brad propped his feet up on a chair, talking loudly. "You know how it is," he said to Greg, the manager. "They come and act like they belong, expect special treatment. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Greg gave a nervous chuckle, then stopped abruptly when he noticed Sophia hovering in the doorway. "You okay?" he asked her. She hesitated. I think she really was a guest. Brad rolled his eyes. "Doesn't matter. No key, no proof. End of story." But it wasn't. Because outside the lodge, sitting beneath a wooden trellis dusted with snow, Angela had pulled out her phone not to call the police, not to post a video, but to write. Her fingers stiff from cold, and emotion tapped out the words she couldn't say aloud. "Some wounds don't bleed. They just burn." Quietly. Her journal app blinked back at her. She paused, staring at the snow, melting into the fabric of her coat. She remembered her husband David, and the time they were denied service in Mississippi in 1982. He had held her hand so tightly that Day whispered, "We don't argue with ignorance, we outlive it." Now with him gone 5 years, those words felt heavier than ever. The quiet around her was only broken when a voice, young and clear, spoke from the path. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned. The boy from the cafe, the one in the hoodie, stood a few feet away, holding out a napkin. His hand was shaking. I recorded everything he said, voice low, but certain. "If you want the video, or if you want help, I can send it to you." Angela looked at him for a moment, studying his face. He couldn't have been older than 17. His eyes, wide with sincerity, reminded her of someone. "Why did you record it?" she asked. "Because no one else was going to do anything," he replied. She took the napkin and offered the smallest smile. "Thank you," she said. "But sometimes we act even when we're not ready. And sometimes that's the bravest thing." He nodded and handed her a slip of paper with his email. "Just in case." Angela folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. He walked away, his boots crunching in the snow. Back inside, the tension simmered. Sophia finally took a deep breath and approached Greg. She deserves an apology. Greg blinked. "What are you talking about?" The woman. "Ms. Robinson. She booked a suite. I checked the log. She's here for 3 nights. Greg looked away. "Sophia, don't get involved. You know Brad. It'll just—" "She didn't do anything," she said louder. And we all stood there. Brad stepped in. "Don't go starting some woke nonsense. I kept this place safe. You humiliated her." There it was spoken aloud. A truth so raw it cut through the room like broken glass. Greg tried to hush her, but it was too late. One of the guests had heard. Another had been listening. The tide, slow and uncertain, was starting to shift. Angela returned to the lobby late that afternoon. Her coat was different now, fresh, unblemished. She held a small book in one hand and a tote in the other. She walked past Brad without looking at him, past Greg, past Sophia, and sat again in the same corner chair she'd been pushed from earlier. Nobody said a word. She opened her book, began to read. Brad fidgeted, shifting in his seat. Angela turned a page. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, something had started to thaw. Not loud, not sudden, but quietly. And sometimes that's where revolutions begin. The next morning, a dense fog wrapped around Mount Rainier, and the lodge was unusually quiet. A thin frost coated the windows, and the usual buzz of morning chatter had been replaced with a strange tension that clung to the air like static. Employees moved slower. Guests whispered more than they spoke. Something had shifted. Angela Robinson wasn't in the cafe this time. She had taken her breakfast in her room away from the place where her dignity had been so publicly tested. But the lodge wasn't done with her story. At exactly 9:17 a.m., a white van with the logo of a national news channel pulled into the parking lot. A second vehicle followed, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows and diplomatic plates. The bellhop caught mid-shovel clearing, snow straightened up, and blinked at the arrival. Inside, Greg was refilling the sugar containers when the phone rang. He picked up on instinct. "Front desk, this is Greg. Your lodge is about to be trending worldwide." A voice replied, "I suggest you prepare." Click. Moments later, the front doors swung open, and in walked Elliot Robinson, dressed in a navy coat with a crisp lapel and carrying nothing but a slim black briefcase. He looked like he belonged on the cover of Time. At just 34, Elliot was already a nationally recognized civil rights attorney, founder of the viral advocacy platform Justice Pulse, and legal advisor for multiple congressional investigations into police misconduct. His steps were measured, calm, calculated. He scanned the lobby, then walked straight to the front desk. "Good morning," he said, voice low, but unwavering. "I'm here for Ms. Angela Robinson. She's expecting me." Greg's face went pale. I didn't expect you would," Elliot replied, tapping his phone. "But you'll recognize this." He turned the screen toward Greg. It was the video. The one the boy had recorded. The one already sitting at 1.3 million views. Greg's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Elliot continued, "This footage has been verified and time-stamped. It shows a woman, my mother, being publicly harassed and assaulted by one of your guests, a police officer, off duty and off the rails. Across the lobby, Brad Tillman, sipping coffee at his usual table, noticed the commotion. He squinted toward the desk, then frowned. Elliot's tone sharpened. This isn't about a coat anymore. It's about a culture of silence, a pattern of looking the other way. But not this time." He turned to face the room. "My mother raised me to believe in the law. She taught me to read Supreme Court opinions when I was 12. She marched with my father before I could walk. She told me that silence is not safety, it's surrender." People had begun to gather. Guests, staff, even tourists with phones. Brad stood up slowly, folding his arms. "Are you trying to make a scene?" he said, his voice cutting. Elliot tilted his head. The scene made itself. "You poured coffee on a woman you didn't know. A guest? A mother? My mother?" Brad scoffed. "She didn't belong here, according to you," Elliot asked. "And what credentials do you have for judging who belongs where I'm a cop?" Elliot stepped closer. "You were off duty, out of uniform, and now, under investigation. The department's already been notified." Brad's jaw twitched. "This is harassment," "No," Elliot said firmly. "This is accountability." From behind the counter, Sophia stepped forward, voice trembling. "He's telling the truth. I saw it happen." Greg turned to her, startled. "I froze," she said, eyes glistening. "But I shouldn't have." Elliot turned to her gently. "And you're not alone. But today you did speak. That matters." The energy in the room shifted. Mrs. Whitmore, who had sat watching smugly in earlier days, now looked down at her shoes. Other staff slowly emerged from the shadows of the kitchen and the back offices. No one spoke in Brad's defense. Angela appeared then. She entered quietly dressed in a cream blouse and a soft blue scarf. Her poise filled the space. She walked with the serenity of someone who had been through fire and come out polished, not burned. She approached Elliot, her eyes misted but steady. He leaned in, and she whispered something that made him nod slowly. Angela turned to Brad. "I don't need your apology," she said. "I've learned not to wait for what was never meant to come. But I need you to understand one thing. Every time you see a black woman and assume she's less remembered today, remember me." Brad swallowed hard. He tried to speak, but no words came. Angela turned to the room. Respect is not given by uniform, and it cannot be taken by ignorance. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear or avoidance. It was reflection. The press had begun rolling, and by the time Angela and Elliot stepped outside into the bright snow, the video had already doubled in views. News anchors were discussing the case. Hashtags had emerged. Inside, Greg sat down at the front desk, pale and quiet. Sophia turned to him. "We need to talk about training, about hiring, about who we protect." He nodded. Outside, Elliot opened the SUV door for his mother. "You okay?" he asked. Angela looked at the mountain peaks and the distant snow glittering like stars. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm seen." By the afternoon, the story had spread like wildfire. News segments replayed the video every hour each, with new headlines. Civil rights attorney confronts officer who assaulted his mother Mount Rainier Lodge under fire after racial incident, and silent no more. The woman behind the viral coffee clip. By evening, the video had reached over 4 million views. Comments flooded in from every corner of the country. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief. But a growing number shared stories of their own quiet humiliations, invisible wounds, silent battles they had buried for years. Angela's story had cracked something wide open. Brad Tillman was suspended by the sheriff's department that same day. An internal investigation was launched, and the police union issued a brief statement expressing deep concern over the events captured on video. But the damage was done. His name, his face, his actions were etched into the internet forever. Inside the lodge, the atmosphere was palpably different. No one joked by the fireplace. No one laughed too loudly. Even the holiday music that had played on loop had been replaced by the soft instrumental hum of classical piano. The staff moved with a kind of quiet urgency, as if trying to undo what could no longer be unseen. Sophia sat alone in the employee break room, scrolling through the comment section of the TikTok she had finally decided to post. In the video, she had admitted she froze. She said she should have spoken, should have stepped in, should have done something. Her voice cracked in the final seconds as she looked straight into the lens and said, "I won't stay silent again." The video went viral overnight. Thousands of people commented with the hashtag, "Eurus, I should have spoken." Teachers, nurses, flight attendants, students all confessing the moments they watched racism unfold and said nothing. Her vulnerability had opened a door many were afraid to even acknowledge existed. Greg, the manager, knocked lightly on the door. "I saw your video," he said. "It took courage." Sophia looked up, wary. "I should have done it sooner." He nodded. "We're getting media requests, reporters, legal inquiries. The owners are flying in tomorrow." She stood. What are we going to do? Greg hesitated. We're starting with a staff meeting. Mandatory. And I've reached out to a training consultant. She raised an eyebrow. DEI. Yeah, real one. Not some online slideshow. Sophia crossed her arms. What about the rest of it? Greg exhaled. Angela hasn't filed a lawsuit yet, but she's agreed to speak to us privately. She wants it to be productive. Later that day, Angela and Elliot returned to the lodge not for confrontation, but for conversation. They were escorted into a private meeting room where Greg and several department heads were waiting. Angela wore a teal blouse with a silver brooch shaped like a feather. Elliot carried a folder, though it stayed closed the entire time. Greg opened the meeting awkwardly. Ms. Robinson. Mr. Robinson, thank you for coming. I want to start by saying we are deeply sorry for what happened here. It was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility. Angela listened, her expression unreadable. Elliot nodded. We're not here to shame you, but we are here to make sure this doesn't get buried. My mother doesn't need your apology. She needs your action. Angela finally spoke. This place has a beautiful view of the mountain. But what good is a view if the people inside feel unseen? Greg's mouth parted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I've spent my life being quiet in rooms like this, Angela continued. It's how I survived academia corporate events board meetings. I learned to keep my voice soft so others could feel comfortable. She looked up. But I've raised a son who speaks loud when it matters. The room went still. Greg leaned forward. We want to work with you. Create a policy, training, outreach. Sophia entered the room at that moment. She wasn't on the agenda, but she stepped forward anyway. I'd like to be part of that, she said. Not just for show. For real. Angela smiled at her. You already are. Word of the meeting spread quickly. That night, the lodge announced a partnership with Justice Pulse to begin developing a community engagement program and a new training framework for all employees. Local news picked it up within hours. Across town, a small podcast studio prepared for an interview that would ripple just as far as the original video. Angela sat across from her son Elliot under soft lights and surrounded by microphones. Their show, titled The Mountain Speaks, was the first time Angela had ever told her story publicly. But it wasn't a story of rage. It was a story of patterns and pain and patience. I wasn't humiliated because a man poured coffee on me, she said into the mic. I was heartbroken because I thought I had outlived this. Elliot looked at her gently. You raised me to think we could outrun it. She nodded. Turns out we can't, but we can name it, and we can confront it, and we can teach others how to unlearn it. The episode went live that night. It hit 500,000 downloads in a week. Listeners wrote in thanking Angela for her composure, her dignity, her strength. One woman wrote, You reminded me that quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes quiet is the strongest voice in the room. Meanwhile, the lodge experienced a different kind of transformation. The holiday guests who remained were offered private listening sessions hosted by Elliot's team to discuss bias and inclusivity. Local business owners were invited to partner with the lodge to diversify its supply chains. Within a month, the kitchen began sourcing ingredients from Black-owned farms and indigenous co-ops in the Pacific Northwest. And perhaps most tellingly, Mrs. Whitmore, the woman who had muttered under her breath just days before, returned to the cafe. This time, She helped a black couple find their table when staff was overwhelmed. She didn't say much, but she made eye contact, and she nodded. Small things, but real. Angela sat by the fireplace that evening, sipping chamomile tea. Sophia walked by and asked, "Do you need anything?" Angela shook her head. "No, dear. You've already given more than most." As the fire flickered low and the snow outside deepened, the lodge wasn't just a building on a mountain anymore. It had become something else. A place where something cracked and let the light in. Winter lingered over Mount Rainier like a hush, soft and unyielding. But inside the Timber Crest Lodge change was no longer a murmur. It was a movement. In the weeks that followed the incident, the lodge became more than just a tourist haven. It became a conversation. The staff training that Greg had promised rolled out in full force. Elliot's team from Justice Pulse designed workshops that didn't just check boxes, they challenged assumptions. There were uncomfortable moments, realizations, tears, and for many, a kind of awakening that had nothing to do with headlines and everything to do with facing themselves. Angela returned not as a guest, but as a speaker. One afternoon, she stood before the staff in a repurposed event room. No microphone, no notes, just presence. "I don't want you to remember what happened to me," she said. "I want you to remember what didn't happen before it. The silence, the hesitation. That's where change lives." Her words weren't loud, but they stayed in the room long after she left it. The lodge initiated partnerships with several local organizations that focused on racial equity and hospitality. New hiring policies were implemented. Vendors shifted. Voices once ignored were now shaping how the business moved forward. But the biggest shift was personal. Sophia, once a quiet waitress, had taken on a new role as Director of Guest Inclusion and Culture, a title that didn't exist a month prior. Her first initiative was creating anonymous feedback loops for guests and staff, ensuring no one ever felt voiceless again. She also began hosting open forums every Friday, where employees shared stories not just about work, but about their lives, their families, their fears, and the things they wished others knew. Angela attended one of those sessions. She sat in the back listening. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she told the story of the first time she saw her mother cry, not because of what someone said, but because of what she didn't say when it mattered. "There's a kind of guilt that doesn't go away with time," she said. "But if you do the work, it turns into something else, not pride exactly, but purpose." The room was silent, then applause. Brad Tillman never returned to the lodge. After the investigation concluded, he was placed on administrative leave and later resigned from the force altogether. A public apology was issued, though many questioned its sincerity. Angela never responded to it publicly. When asked by a journalist whether she forgave him, she simply replied, "Forgiveness is not for show. It's for peace. And peace takes time." Elliot's podcast grew into a national platform. The episode with his mother became a school curriculum case study. He traveled to other cities, helping other communities confront their own silences. But he always returned to Timbercrest, not for work, but for his mother. One morning, they hiked a trail just beyond the lodge, where the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of moss and pine needles. The mountain stood tall in the distance, unmoved, yet somehow different. Angela paused at a clearing. This was your father's favorite spot, she said. Elliot looked around. I can see why. He used to say, she continued, some mountains are meant to be climbed. Others are meant to be witnessed. She smiled at the memory, then sat on a bench carved into the ridge. You did more than witness this mountain, Elliot said. You made it speak. Angela looked at her son, pride shimmering behind her calm eyes. I didn't make it speak. I just stopped whispering. Below them, the lodge buzzed quietly with new life. A group of students on a cultural immersion trip checked in at the front desk. A couple asked about local Black-owned restaurants. Sophia led a tour group through the redesigned art wing, which now featured work from Indigenous and African American artists native to the Pacific Northwest. Change hadn't come in banners or slogans. It had arrived in steady steps, quiet acknowledgments, small actions that layered over time, like snow on a mountaintop. Before leaving the trail, Angela tucked a small journal into the crook of a cedar tree. Inside were her reflections, not of what was done to her, but what was done after. A reminder that legacy isn't about what breaks us, but how we rebuild in its place. Back in the lodge, a new plaque had been mounted near the fireplace. It read, "In honor of those who speak softly, stand firmly, and inspire quietly." This space is dedicated to voices once silenced and now heard. Angela stood before it for a long while, not reading it, but remembering. The warmth from the fire touched her face, but the warmth inside her was something deeper. She turned to Sophia, who stood beside her. "I'm proud of you," Angela said. Sophia blinked back tears. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." Angela shook her head. "No, dear, you were always here. You just didn't have a place to stand. Now you do." The snow outside fell again this time, soft, gentle, like a blessing, not a burden. And as the guests arrived, and the logs crackled in the hearth, and the mountain stood witness, Angela Robinson walked forward, not back to the past, but into a world she had quietly helped shape. A world where dignity was no longer something earned. It was honored, recognized, defended, and finally believed. Angela Robinson's journey began as many stories of injustice do in silence. She entered the Timbercrest Lodge not to protest, not to disrupt, but simply to rest, to find peace in a snowy corner of the world. But what met her there was a brutal reminder that peace isn't given equally. She was dismissed, targeted, and publicly humiliated for nothing more than the color of her skin and the assumptions attached to it. What Officer Brad Tillman saw wasn't a dignified guest. He saw a threat where there was none. And in a moment that took less than 30 seconds, he poured coffee not just on a woman's coat, but on years of dignity, grace, and restraint. But the most powerful moments in Angela's story weren't loud. They were quiet. The way she refused to raise her voice. The way she walked out calm and composed. The way she chose not to meet ignorance with rage, but with reflection. It was that silence, that poise, that turned a small act of cruelty into a national reckoning. Because what Brad didn't know, what so many like him never stopped to consider, is that behind every quiet black woman they ignore or belittle, there is a story, a legacy, a family, a fire. He didn't know Angela raised Elliot Robinson, one of the country's most vocal and effective civil rights attorneys. He didn't know the woman he tried to erase had built her life on standing tall, not screaming loud. And he didn't know that within days, the world would not only know her name, but carry her story like a mirror. Elliot's response wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. He used the very tools his mother had taught him, discipline, integrity, and resolve to call out injustice in the same room where it began. But more importantly, he didn't come just to confront. He came to educate, to invite others into growth, to build bridges instead of burning them. And it worked. Timbercrest Lodge became more than just a backdrop for a viral video. It became a place of transformation. Staff members stepped forward. Apologies turned into action. Trainings were implemented. Voices once sidelined were now shaping the culture. Sophia, who once stood frozen, now leads programs that ensure no guest is ever made to feel unseen again. Even those who initially stayed silent began to speak, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. Angela's story is not a fantasy. It's not a fairy tale with clean heroes and easy villains. It's real, it's raw, and it reflects what so many people experience every day in spaces that were never built for them. But it's also proof of something else, that one act of dignity can ripple across a country. That quiet resistance can create loud change. That being the target of injustice doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful if you know how to respond. So what can we learn from Angela's journey? We learn that silence can be strength, but also complicity. We learn that it's never too late to speak, to grow, to shift. We learn that justice doesn't always arrive with shouting or marching. It sometimes arrives with a soft voice, a steady stare, and the courage to stay in the room. In our own lives, the moments might not be as dramatic, but they will come. They already have. At work, when someone is passed over. At school, when a joke goes too far. At the dinner table, when bias wears the mask of tradition. These are our tests. And how we respond, what we say or choose not to say, says everything about who we are. You don't have to be Elliot Robinson to make a difference. You don't need a law degree, a platform, or a camera crew. You just need awareness, compassion, and the willingness to act when it matters, even if your voice shakes, even if you're alone. Angela didn't change the world overnight, but she reminded it of something essential, that dignity is not earned through silence, but through presence. That the strongest voices aren't always the loudest, and that when you raise someone with love, integrity, and quiet strength, what they become can change everything. If her story touched, you don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us how it made you feel or what it made you remember. Because the more we speak, the more we listen, the more we grow together. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Angela, for reminding us that every quiet voice is still a voice. And sometimes it's the one that moves the world.